here. We are here as a result of information that has come to our attention in the last 24 hours, as reported in the Hartford Courant by reporter John Lender as well, that the state Democratic Party has brazenly requested the federal government agency known as the Federal Elections Commission to literally toss out our state election laws. Let me explain. The state Democratic Party has hired the Washington law firm of Sandler Reef, represented by Attorney Reef, who is representing the Connecticut State Democratic Party. They have petitioned the Federal Elections Commission for a ruling, an opinion, which would say that all of the money that they collected, that they've raised in their federal campaign account, money that is not subject to the rules and regulations and restrictions of Connecticut state law, money that allows people who are state contractors to contribute to that fund, that money be allowed to be used exclusively for statewide candidates, in direct contradiction of our state law. To their credit, they're very honest about what they hope to do. They indicate that the state Democratic Party plans to undertake a mailing on behalf of Governor Malloy, as well as similar mailings on behalf of other non-federal candidates, not only in the 2014 elections, but as well as future elections. They go on to say, for purposes of this request, the commission, the federal commission, should assume that the requested mailings will not reference any candidate for federal office. As most of you know, there's a dual system, a federal system and a state system. And we here in the state of Connecticut, as in most states, recognize the difference. That money raised under the rules of the federal government are to be used for federal candidates, and monies raised under the rules of the state party are to be used for state candidates. The Democratic State Party has put forth a suggested sample mailer wherein they intend on using federal money, exclusively federal money, for exclusively statewide candidates. And as an example, they give an example of a mailer that they're sending out on behalf of the candidacy and to promote the election of Governor Dannel Malloy. Governor Malloy, as the Republican candidate, as probably 90% of all candidates, Democratic and Republican, are participating in the Citizen Election Program. The Citizen Election Program is a program whereby, after a candidate meets certain qualifications and swears under oath to abide by the Connecticut law, they will receive state taxpayer money to run their campaigns. Each and every candidate who participates in that program is required to sign a signed piece of paper under oath, wherein they promise that they understand that they are personally liable and must repay to the Citizens Election Fund any monies that are not expended in accordance with the provision of Connecticut law. They understand and sign an initial, a provision that says they understand they're required to comply with the requirements of the program, including all applicable statutes. Ladies and gentlemen, as you might know, anyone who's followed the history of campaign finance law in the state of Connecticut, we have unfortunately been marred in this state by political scandal. And in response to that, the Connecticut General Assembly did a comprehensive campaign finance law in 2005 that's been modified subsequently. The cornerstone of that law was a prohibition against contractors who do business with the state of Connecticut donating to state candidates. A prohibition. That prohibition was challenged in a United States federal case known as Green Party of Connecticut versus Garfield. And it was upheld by the United States Court of Appeals, wherein it said that Connecticut laws has a ban on contractor contributions. By contrast, unequivocally addresses the perception of corruption brought about by Connecticut's recent scandals. By totally shutting off the flow of money from contractors to state officials, it eliminates any notion that contractors can influence state officials by donating to their campaigns. Thus, although the Connecticut campaign finance ban on contractor contributions is a drastic measure, it is an appropriate response to a specific series of incidents that have created a strong appearance of corruption with respect to all contractor contributions. The federal government upheld our law that was touted by Republicans and Democrats alike, our law that was championed, ironically, by the very Democratic Party that is now attempting to ignore that law. Earlier in this campaign season, many of us raised questions with regard to the fundraising activities of our Governor, Dan Malloy. Governor Malloy crisscrossed this country, raising millions of dollars for the state Democratic Party. When he was questioned by many, including Senator McKinney, the answer was, I follow the laws of the state of Connecticut. The concern was that the very people the governor of the state of Connecticut was soliciting money from were the people who were were receiving state contracts. As an example, Thomas May, the CEO of Northeast Utilities, gave $10,000 to the federal account. Northeast Utilities is a state contractor. Northeast Utilities executives gave a total of $45,000 to the federal account for the Democratic Party. Adam Winstanley and Carter Winstanley, principals of Winstanley Enterprises, developer of the downtown crossing in New Haven, each gave $10,000 last year to the federal account of the state Democratic Party. As did a third partner. Its anchor tenant, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, is relocating with a $51 million state incentive grant. Winstanley Enterprises gave a total of $50,000 to the Connecticut State Democratic Party. Hussam Ahmad of Forest Hills, New York, gave $10,000 to the Connecticut Democratic Party on March 25th, less than 2 weeks after the state awarded his engineering firm, HAKS, an $8.63 million contract to inspect overhead power lines on New Haven line of Metro North. Last year, he and 6 others associated with HAKS gave $45,000 to the state Democratic Party's federal account. Ed Snyder wrote a $10,000 check on August 27th, 6 months after Comcast's Spectacor's subsidiary, Global Spectrum, was chosen to manage the XL Center in Hartford and Rensselaer Field in East Hartford. He subsequently returned his check. Mark Summers of Sarasota, Florida, the project manager of Bridgeport Landing, a waterfront redevelopment in Bridgeport, gave $10,000 on September 26th, a day before the State Bond Commission approved $31 million in financing for Summers' anchor tenant, Bass Pro Shops. As the State Department of Transportation opposition to the proposed transfer of the Bridgeport Port Jefferson Ferry Terminal finally evaporated last year, the company's chief executive officer, Brian McAllister, wrote a $20,000 check to the Connecticut Democrats' federal account. Philip Cambo of Sturbridge, Mass., president of Northern Tree Service, a state contractor, gave the state Democratic Party's federal account $10,000. Jane Copa of Delray Beach, Florida, an executive with the Simon Conover Company of Delray Beach, Florida, is the company's founder, and Stephen Conover of the West Hartford is on Conover's board of directors, all gave $10,000, totaling $50,000 to the Connecticut Democratic Party's federal account. Francisco Borges, chairman of the Landmark Partners, a state contractor, gave $20,000 to the state's federal account. Alan Lazowitzki, chairman of Laz Parking, gave $20,000 to the state's Democratic federal account. John Strafstrom, a partner in Bridgeport law firm of Pullman and Comley, a state contractor, gave $10,000 to the Connecticut Democrats' federal account. Bob and Kelly Landino each gave $10,000. Landino's president of Center Plan Development, also a state contractor. All this money is prohibited under our state law to be given to the state account and used in statewide offices. Yet all that money was given. In fact, the state Democratic Party, as all parties do, have 2 pots of money, the state and the federal. In the state account, if you check the most recent filings, the state Democratic Party has only about $320,000 left over. But in their federal account, they have in excess of $2 million. In a tight legislative, senatorial, and certainly gubernatorial races, they want to spend that money. But the law prohibits them from doing that. So what do they want to do? They've hired a person to go to the federal agency and say, please tell the state to butt out of our business. We don't want to follow that law. We want to do it our way. What we are doing here today is calling on the State Elections Enforcement Commission to enforce state law. In that, regardless of what the federal opinion given by the Federal Elections Commission is, that state law is state law, and it should be enforced to its fullest. Therefore, if any candidate who has taken the sworn oath and has received citizen election money benefits in the slightest degree from the kind of influx of money from the state Democrats' federal account, they should be fined and penalized to the full extent of the law, and as they've indicated, personally liable to repay the entire citizen election grant back to the state of Connecticut. You know, you have one-party rule for a long time, and many of us, certainly on this side of the aisle, have been bemoaning the fact of the arrogance and brazenness and the dangers of one-party rule. Here is yet another example. If, in fact, the Democrats truly believed that the laws as we currently have, the very laws that they fought for, I quote upon quote from the former chairs and current chairs of the elections enforcement and the general elections committees of the General Assembly, calling for getting money out of politics, keeping everything on the up and up, removing the specter of influence. And yet this very party is going in the dark of night, if you will, without any publicity, asking that those rules be tossed in the garbage. It is wrong. If they wanted to change the rules, do it in the light of day, do it under the legislative process, do it with public input, do it in the full specter of the public, having questions asked of them, answer them, pass the law, and sign the law. That's the way, if you want to change the law, that's the way to do it, not the way they're doing it. This time I'll turn it over to Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Larry. I'll be very brief, but there's a point that Larry made that bears repeating. When we passed campaign finance reform in 2005, the overriding goal was to clean up our election system. The single most important factor, supported unanimously, even those of us who didn't support public financing, all supported an amendment that eliminated contractor influence in our elections. We banned contractor contributions from state elections. The federal court upheld that ban. What the governor is trying to do is shamelessly undo that ban on contractors. There's a reason why the Democrats' federal account has over $1 million and their state account has very little, because they have gone out and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from state contractors, people doing business with the state. And our goal was to give people in Connecticut the assurance that those contractors would not have an influence or even an appearance of influence in our election system. And unfortunately, that is all going by the wayside with this attempt. Several years later, most recently, when Governor Malloy championed increasing the amount state contractors could give to the federal account, up to $10,000, many of us, I remember Senator McLaughlin, standing on the Senate floor saying, this is what's going to happen. That money is going to find its way into our state elections. And Democrat after Democrat after Democrat stood up and said, no, Senator, you're wrong. This is what we need to do to fight the influence of Citizens United. Well, guess what? He was right, and we were right. And the silence by the Democrats in this legislature who stood up and fought for clean elections, who said contractors have no business in our elections, is deafening. They need to stand with us. They need to stand up against the effort of their party to undo our state election laws. Having recently gone through a larger statewide race, I can tell you that the SCEC does an incredible job. They work hard. They're understaffed. They follow our laws. They should not be bullied or intimidated by this governor into wiping out the importance of our state laws. And we will stand in support of them in enforcing our state laws and hope that the Democrats will join us in doing just that.
I'd like to add that I listed a series of state contractors who contributed to the state Democratic Party. Please understand, I don't no way imply that they did anything wrong. That was totally legal. But they were under the impression, I presume, that the monies that they donated were going to the federal laws and that the party that they were donating was going to follow all laws, including the state law. It is the Democratic Party that wants to turn their contributions that were prohibited from being used in state races and put them into state races. And if I was one of those donators who's made to look bad, made to look as if they have done something wrong and are trying to garner undue influence, I would be equally annoyed. And I would call upon the Democratic Party to stop doing what they're attempting to do. At this point, we'll take any questions from